I remember a therapist saying to me back in my 30s, you know, people like you are really just trying to recreate their childhood. And you know what? They could not have been more wrong. This myth still gets pushed on people who grew up with abuse and neglect. People who say it, I know they have good intentions, and they think they're shedding light on something that they believe we just don't understand, that we need to be told, it needs to be explained to us. You actually want to be abandoned. Have you ever been told that? You know, it must look like that from the outside, but I do not believe that's true. As a person who lived through this myself with neglectful parents and later several relationships that left me abandoned and alone in a big way in my young adulthood, I'll tell you what I believe is really going on when we keep repeating the pattern and getting into relationships and getting abandoned. Now, of course we don't want to be abandoned. We want to be loved and safe and accepted just like anyone, and we deserve it. But to heal, we've got to get rid of the confusing and shaming idea that we're trying to get abandoned and focus on what the real problems are. Because when you can see the problem, you can take steps to heal it. You can heal this. You can learn to form relationships with good people who love you and are committed to you. Here's what I think is really going on when you find yourself stuck in an abandonment loop. It keeps happening, all right? Number one, abandonment happened to you before. That's the reason. Getting abandoned as a child has a way of squashing your expectations and at the same time making you incredibly brilliant at adapting to horrible circumstances at home. So you crap fit to it. You fit yourself to crap because you got trained to do that when you were a kid, to do it so well. When people treated you bad, you were like, I've got this, no problem. I'm a ninja at this. I can take anything. I'll solve it. But when you take that into adulthood, it can be a really terrible approach to evaluating people. You don't want to be good at fitting yourself to crap. You want to be bad at it. You want to have a really good red light detector that's like, this is crap. I don't want to be here. And unfortunately, when CPTSD is untreated, it just feels normal. It feels normal that people are causing you to have to put up with horrible treatment. And if you didn't have that, if you had healed that crap fit, which you can do, with that healed red light detector, you can see people coming a mile off. You're like, that's not a person who's going to stick around. That's not a person who's sincerely interested in me, or that's a person who they may be interested, but they're not capable of making that kind of a commitment. So you start to have discernment to choose people who are safe for you to give your heart and invest your future in. And then you're not abandoned. All right, number two. You learned that you had to have a very nice personality, again, because of the circumstances of what you were growing up with. So you habitually show this very nice side of your personality to the world. You go into meeting people, but then because you have CPTSD, you have bursts of anger. You might have emotional flashbacks. That's a thing that happens to people with CPTSD. If you haven't heard of it, it's kind of like regular flashbacks, but it's emotional. It's often coming from a time before you had language. You might wake up in a bad mood and you don't even know why, but you just feel like everybody's against you. And you may find yourself banging around the house, being critical, being impossible to please. Sometimes that's an emotional flashback. Well, that's not fun for partners to deal with. So the first person they meet is super nice. Then the person, when you get angry, you lash out tremendously. That's frightening to healthy people. So if you have been in a relationship with somebody who kind of had it together and could detect red flags, that may be the point when they walked away and left you. And it's sad. It's a terrible loss. But just stay with me here, because it's never too late to have another chance at life, and you can heal these emotional flashbacks and these behaviors. All right. Some other unpleasant personality things that come along with CPTSD are like, maybe you're unreliable or unreasonable when you feel hurt or left out, right? Sometimes those feelings can get exaggerated for us. Or maybe because you know that you tend to overreact things, you try to compensate by being very fake. Fake nice, fake okay, I'm fine, I'm cool. No, it's no problem. And to other people, that just seems like something's not right here. Like you don't seem to have any boundaries. So that's a reason that people might be backing away from you. This is all stuff you can heal, but for right now, it might be pushing people away. All right? A fourth reason that abandonment might be following you in your life is that your self-esteem is so wounded that you feel embarrassed to actually feel and say what you want in a relationship, when you would like it to go to the next step, or to even admit that what you want is marriage. It's this weird thing when I coach people around relationships who have complex PTSD. I have never met anyone who could admit openly. It was people who are in the dating phase or hoping to date. I've never met anyone who could admit that what they wanted is marriage. And at first I was just like, well, what's going on? Am I like really behind the times and nobody wants marriage? Actually, when I started asking more questions of people, it turned out that was everybody's heart's desire. Everybody I've coached has had the heart's desire to be married one day. And yet, when I ask, what is your ideal relationship, they hedge their bet on that and they say, oh, I want a life partner, or oh, I want a long-term relationship. And so I push on that a little bit and say, when you say long-term, do you mean like after 10 years or something, the whole thing is over? And they're like, no, I want it to last. I'm like, well, that's different than a long-term relationship. That's a marriage. That's where you make a lifetime commitment. And that feels, to a person who's been through a lot of hardship in relationships because of their trauma, that feels like an impossible dream. It feels like too much to ask, and they feel like they can't ask for it. But the problem is that you compromise. When you can't admit what you really want, you're kind of entering into the dating situation dishonestly for yourself and for the other person. And it's a setup for you to feel really disappointed and hurt when things don't turn out the way you secretly hoped they would, when it only turns out to be a long-term relationship, right? So I really encourage you to support your healing by writing down on paper what it is you really want, even though you know that we don't all get what we want. And even if you get what you want, like, it may not work out forever. Those are all givens, but can you admit what you really want and get that on paper? All right. The fifth reason that you might be a little bit in the danger zone for abandonment is that you may have been conditioned through therapy, for example, to focus excessively on your feelings, and instead of focusing also on solutions or considering other people's feelings. And what happens here for couples is that when one or both people are like really focused on their feelings and they can't really move past expressing them and then moving into the solution thing, it's easier said than done, I know. But when you can't do it, this is what they call like processing death. You process your feelings forever to the death. And it has a way of killing the romance in a relationship. It has a way of just sucking the life out of the partners when they have to spend 3-4 hours talking about feelings. And going into that loop of feelings is a lot what happens when we talk about traumatic experiences and feelings. And this is one reason why I teach people over and over again, if you're not getting anywhere, consider not talking so much and instead using writing. You can write your fears and resentments. That's a technique I teach for free. It's called the Daily Practice. I'm sure you've heard me mention it. I always bring it up, but it's free. It's a free online course. There's a link down there, the Daily Practice. If you sign up for that, you can come join calls with me. We do the techniques together and I answer questions so that you can get really good at this. It's incredibly helpful at learning to re-regulate and bring those emotions back down. But speaking of emotions, the sixth reason why abandonment can be so common for us, that once we've been abandoned as kids, it's hard to escape the pattern, is emotional flashbacks. I mentioned them before, but when they are not understood and managed, these intense outbursts of emotion can go so far as to be abusive. It can be emotional abuse. It can even go into physical abuse. But in those emotional flashbacks is when you're most vulnerable to do behaviors that are not okay with other people and that are going to cause the end of a relationship. Number 7 is something called abandonment melange. And this is a term coined by Pete Walker, who wrote the excellent book on CPTSD. I'll put a link to that below too. Abandonment melange is a toxic combination of terrible emotions of grief, rage, and terror. Have you ever had that? When you have been left, or even when you fear that you've been left, a sick feeling creeps over you, and it's almost like a chemical poisoning. There's a word for that, abandonment melange. It doesn't happen to everybody. It happens to people who have an abandonment wound. And if you have that, then I don't even need to tell you how toxic it is for relationships. It causes unreasonable perception and behavior and a sort of meltdown emotionally that doesn't feel like a safe or grounded person to anybody who's dating you. So healing your abandonment melange, and you know where it starts? Is knowing what it's called. When you know what it's called and you start to notice it's happening, you can go, oh wait, hold on, this is abandonment melange. My feelings are actually distorting my perception right now. And it's very comforting to know that, because if you're in abandonment melange, things are not as bad as you are perceiving them to be. What a relief, all right? So number 8. We have trouble developing relationships in a conscious way. It's difficult when you have a big attachment wound to go slowly enough to get to know somebody properly so that you can find out, are there red flags here? Do they have strong feelings about you? Do you have strong feelings about them? This takes time to develop. And what happens with people with CPTSD is sometimes we have huge walls up. We can't go fast at all. We can't even go on a date. Or we go on one date and we're already planning a trip to Vegas to go get married, right? And that's the nature of CPTSD. But there are workarounds you can use. Even if your mind is still doing that, part of you can still recognize that as a person with CPTSD who tends to either like put up walls or rush in, you can learn to handle that better with workarounds. That's something I teach in my dating course, so that's another link I'll put down below if you want to learn about that, is how to use a more structured approach to dating so that you can get around that impulsiveness of pushing people away or rushing in. All of these reasons are happening because of emotional and neurological wounds that happen in the life of a child who's abused and neglected. And if that was you, I want you to give yourself just a giant hug of approval and validation that despite all that you have gone through, that you're trying to heal. You're here, you're watching this video, you're trying to learn to love other people in a healthy way, and nothing could be more beautiful and noble. And now that you're healing, your judgment's gonna start healing. And when people say, oh, you're just trying to recreate your terrible childhood, you can take that into consideration and decide for yourself if it's true. And if it's not, you can say, thanks for your opinion, but nah. And if you care to, you can express yourself about how you see it, because how you see it matters. It can be such a relief to get some insight about what goes on with CPTSD, how normal you are, how you're just a person having a normal reaction to some very abnormal circumstances. You can start to get free of that burden of shame and self-doubt about like, why do I keep making these same mistakes? The answer is, you have CPTSD. It's normal. I have it. If you do too, I have great news. These are symptoms that you can work on and you can heal. And if you're wondering if you have CPTSD, I have this quiz. This is the CPTSD quiz, and I invite you to take it. It has a whole list of symptoms that are common. You can check and see how many of them might be true for you. And that is accessible down below. I just put the link at the very top of the description section there. And if you're working on that abandonment wound that we've been talking about, I've got another video of mine lined up for you that you might find helpful. It's right here, and I will see you very, very soon.